The second I saw my wife step through the airport doors, every lonely night of the last 7 months suddenly felt worth surviving. She looked exhausted. Her shoulders were lower than I remembered. Dark circles framed her eyes. Yet the moment she spotted me, her face lit up with the same smile that had made me fall in love 15 years earlier. She didn't walk. She ran. The bouquet slipped from my hand as she wrapped both arms around my neck so tightly I could barely breathe. For several seconds, nothing else existed. Not the announcements echoing through the terminal. Not the rolling suitcases. Not the crowds pushing past us. Only her heartbeat against my chest. "I made it home," she whispered. I closed my eyes. So did I. 7 months apart had felt like 7 years. Every holiday had been celebrated through a phone screen. Every anniversary had ended with a frozen video call because the internet where she worked barely functioned. Every night I had slept on only one side of our bed because the other side still felt like it belonged to her. I had counted every sunrise until this moment. But happiness has a strange habit of disappearing without warning. As we finally stepped apart, I reached for her suitcase. Before my hand touched the handle, someone else grabbed it. A tall man in his early 40s calmly lifted her luggage as though it belonged to him. He smiled at my wife. She smiled back. Not politely, not awkwardly. It was a smile that seemed familiar, comfortable. He nodded toward the parking lot. Without saying a single word, he started walking away with her suitcase. My heart stopped. Emily didn't stop him. She didn't introduce him. She simply looked at me, then looked down at the floor. That tiny silence lasted maybe 3 seconds. But inside my head, it felt like an entire lifetime. Every terrible thought arrived at once. Had she met someone? Had 7 months changed everything? Was I the only person who still believed we were coming home together? She reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold. "Can we go outside?" she asked softly. "Not let me explain. Not this isn't what it looks like. Just, can we go outside?" I forced myself to nod. The walk through the terminal felt endless. People laughed around us. Families reunited. Children ran toward waiting parents. But I couldn't hear any of it. My eyes stayed fixed on the stranger walking ahead with my wife's suitcase. He never looked back, almost as if he already knew exactly where he was going. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off hundreds of parked cars. The stranger stopped beside a dark blue SUV. He carefully placed Emily's suitcase on the ground instead of loading it into the vehicle. Then, he turned toward us. I expected confidence, maybe even guilt. Instead, the man removed his baseball cap and stood silently, his eyes already filling with tears. He wasn't looking at Emily. He was looking at me. Then he did something I never could have imagined. He walked straight toward me and held out his hand. "My name is Michael," he said. "I've been praying for the chance to meet you." I stared at him without moving. Every instinct told me to ask the question burning inside my mind. "Who are you? Why do you know my wife? Why are you carrying her suitcase?" Before I could speak, Michael smiled sadly. "You don't know me," he said. "But if it weren't for your wife, my daughter wouldn't be alive today." At that moment, everything I believed I understood about the last 7 months began to fall apart. For a few seconds, I couldn't say a word. The anger that had been building inside me suddenly froze in place. I looked at Emily. She lowered her eyes, gently squeezing my hand. "I wanted to tell you," she whispered. "I just didn't know how." Michael took a slow breath. "I know how this must look," he said. "If I were in your position, I'd probably think the same thing." He glanced toward Emily before continuing. "Would you give me 5 minutes? After that, if you never want to see me again, I'll understand." Something in his voice didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded broken. I nodded. Michael opened the back door of the SUV. Inside sat a little girl, no older than 8. She had curly brown hair, bright blue eyes, and a stuffed rabbit tucked tightly beneath one arm. The moment she saw Emily, her entire face lit up. "Miss Emily." She jumped out of the car as fast as her small legs would allow and wrapped both arms around my wife's waist. Emily knelt down immediately. "There she is," she said with a smile that looked equal parts joy and heartbreak. "I missed you so much." "I practiced walking," the little girl said proudly. "Do you want to see?" Emily's eyes instantly filled with tears. "I'd love to." The little girl stepped back and slowly walked across the parking lot. The little girl reached the end of the parking space, turned around with the biggest smile on her face, and raised both arms. "I did it," she shouted. Emily clapped so hard that people walking past actually stopped to watch. You absolutely did, she said, her voice trembling. I'm so proud of you. The little girl ran back and hugged her again. Michael wiped his eyes before looking at me. Her name is Lily. I smiled politely, but confusion still lingered. I don't understand, I admitted. Michael nodded. You deserve to know everything. He leaned against the SUV, taking a deep breath. 7 months ago, my daughter and I were involved in a terrible highway accident. My wife. He paused, unable to continue for a moment. Didn't survive. Silence settled over the parking lot. Lily was rushed to the hospital with multiple broken bones and severe internal injuries. She survived the surgery, but afterward, she stopped talking. Not to doctors, not to therapists, not even to me. For weeks, she stared at the ceiling without saying a single word. I thought I had lost her too. I looked at Emily. She stood quietly beside Lily, gently brushing a strand of hair away from the little girl's face. There wasn't a trace of pride in her expression, only compassion. Michael let out a slow breath. One evening, after every specialist had given us another disappointing update, Emily walked into Lily's room. She wasn't even assigned to our floor that day. She had already finished a 12-hour shift. I remember asking her why she was still there. He smiled faintly. She said, because healing doesn't always happen during office hours. For the next several weeks, Emily came back every evening. Sometimes she brought coloring books, sometimes puzzles. Sometimes she simply sat beside Lily in complete silence. She never tried to force a conversation. She just made sure Lily never felt alone. Then one rainy afternoon, Emily opened a children's storybook and began reading aloud. Halfway through the story, she purposely skipped a sentence. She closed the book. Lily frowned. A few seconds passed. Then, in the quietest little voice imaginable, Lily whispered, "You skipped a page." Michael laughed through his tears. It was the first sentence she'd spoken in almost 6 weeks. Doctors, I stood there, unable to find the right words. Everything I had believed just 20 minutes earlier now felt painfully small. I had convinced myself that 7 months apart had stolen my wife from me. Instead, she had spent those same 7 months giving a broken little girl a reason to live again. Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I made this for you, she said shyly. Emily opened it carefully. Inside was a colorful drawing. A hospital room. A little girl holding a nurse's hand. Outside the window, a bright sunrise stretched across the sky. At the top, written in uneven handwriting, were 6 simple words. You stayed when everyone else left. Emily covered her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks. I'll treasure this forever, she whispered. Lily smiled. I knew you would. Michael looked at me. There were nights when my daughter screamed because she thought she'd never walk again. I didn't know what to say, but your wife always did. When Lily refused therapy, Emily turned every exercise into a game. When she was afraid of another surgery, Emily sat beside her until sunrise. And when I couldn't afford one of the medications, Michael's voice cracked. Emily quietly paid for it herself. I turned toward my wife in complete disbelief. You never told me. She shrugged gently. I wasn't looking for recognition. I just couldn't watch a little girl lose hope. You paid for her treatment? Emily nodded. We've always said money should help people if we have the chance. It felt like the right thing to do. In that moment, I realized something that humbled me. While I had been counting the days until she came home, she had been counting every small victory that brought Lily closer to living a normal life again. The woman I thought I knew had become someone even more remarkable. As the afternoon sun dipped lower over the airport parking lot, Michael reached into his jacket and handed me a sealed envelope. I've carried this for months, he said. Emily refused to take it. I slowly opened it. Inside were hundreds of handwritten notes. Some were from doctors, some from nurses, some from parents, some from children. Every letter told the same story. A woman who stayed after her shift ended. A nurse who never stopped believing. A stranger who became family. At the very bottom was one final note. It simply read, "Thank you for sharing her with the world. Because you did. My daughter still has a future." I looked at Emily. She couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Neither could I. At that moment, I understood something I'll never forget. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about grand romantic gestures. Sometimes they're about loving someone whose kindness changes lives even when no one is watching. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel empty. Emily was already sitting on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, quietly watching the sunrise. I carried 2 cups of coffee outside. Neither of us spoke for a while. Sometimes silence says more than words ever can. Finally, she looked at me. I was afraid. Of what? I asked. She stared at the steam rising from her cup. I was afraid you'd think I came home as a different person. You did, I answered softly. Her face fell. I reached for her hand. But not in the way you think. You came home stronger. You came home carrying stories that most people could never imagine. And somehow, you still chose kindness. Tears filled her eyes. I couldn't save everyone. I know. I still hear some of their voices. I know. I keep wondering if I could have done more. I gently squeezed her hand. The people you couldn't save, they don't erase the lives you did. For the first time since she'd returned, Emily smiled without forcing it. Over the next few months, life slowly found its rhythm again. Weekend breakfasts returned. Movie nights came back. We laughed over burned pancakes, argued about whose turn it was to wash the dishes. And every Sunday evening, we video called Michael and Lily. Lily grew stronger every week. The limp became smaller. Her smile became bigger. One afternoon, she proudly announced she'd joined her school's art club. Emily cried after the call ended. "They're going to be okay," I whispered. She nodded. "I think so am I." A year later, Michael invited us to Lily's 9th birthday. The celebration wasn't extravagant, just family, friends, a backyard full of balloons, children laughing, the kind of happiness that can't be bought. Toward the end of the party, Lily walked onto a small wooden stage her classmates had decorated. She held a folded piece of paper in her hands. "I wrote something," she said nervously. "It's for the 2 people who taught me that heroes don't wear capes." She looked at Emily, then at me. "When I was in the hospital, I thought my story was over. Miss Emily showed me that every ending can become a new beginning." She smiled at me. "And Mr. James, thank you for sharing her with the world. If you had asked her to stay home, I wouldn't be here today." There wasn't a dry eye in the yard, not even mine. After everyone left, Lily handed us a small framed drawing. It showed an airport, a woman carrying a suitcase, a man holding flowers, and another man standing beside a little girl. Above them she had written, "Sometimes the person carrying your luggage is really carrying your gratitude." That drawing now hangs in our hallway. Every time I walk past it, I'm reminded of something I'll never forget. Fear tells us to assume the worst. Love asks us to wait for the truth. Trust isn't believing you'll never have doubts. Trust is refusing to let those doubts speak louder than years of love. The day my wife came home, I thought another man was walking away with my future. Instead, he was walking toward us with a thank you that would stay with us forever. And I learned that the strongest marriages aren't built because life is easy. They're built because, even when fear whispers the loudest, love chooses to listen a little longer. The end.